The wind cut through the canyon like a knife, carrying the scent of snow and smoke. It was late autumn in the Rockies, and the mountains were already wrapped in frost, the pines groaning under the weight of the coming storm. Down by the wagon trail, a small group of traders had stopped, their voices rising in argument. Horses snorted, wagon wheels creaked, and above it all came the frightened cry of a child. The mountain man heard it first. His name was Elias Kane, a broad-shouldered figure wrapped in a worn buffalo hide coat, beard thick and streaked with gray, eyes sharp as the edge of a knife. He had been hauling pelts down from his cabin near Granite Ridge when he saw the commotion below. Now, standing on a rocky slope with his long rifle slung across his shoulder, he narrowed his gaze at the scene unfolding near the wagons. A little girl, no more than 6, stood trembling beside a wagon wheel, her dress torn, her face streaked with mud. One of the traders, a wiry man with a crooked hat, held her by the arm, shaking her roughly as he barked something Elias couldn't quite catch over the wind. But the tone, that cruel, dismissive tone, made his jaw tighten. Elias descended the slope with long, sure strides, boots crunching over gravel and dead grass. He didn't shout yet. He watched as the man pulled the girl toward a horse, muttering something about getting rid of her before she slows us down. That was enough. Stop! Elias's voice cracked through the cold air like a rifle shot. Every head turned. The man froze mid-motion, the girl's sobs cutting off in an instant. Elias kept walking until he stood a few paces away, the wind tugging at the hem of his coat. His hand hovered near the butt of his revolver, though he hadn't drawn it yet. "I'll take that little girl," he said, voice low but steady. The tone left no room for argument. The trader squinted, eyeing Elias up and down. "This ain't your business, stranger," he spat. "She's just some orphan we picked up in town. Ain't got family, ain't got no use. We were taking her south, but she's not worth the trouble." Elias's stare didn't waver. "Then she ain't yours neither. Let her go." There was testing the sound. "You got folks around here?" She shook her head. "Mama's gone. Wagon tipped in the river last week." Her voice broke then, and tears welled up in her eyes, spilling down her cheeks despite her best effort to stop them. Elias crouched down so his eyes were level with hers. His voice softened, the rough mountain rasp easing into something almost gentle. "Ain't right what happened to you, Clara. But you ain't alone no more, you hear?" She nodded weakly, wiping her nose with the back of her sleeve. He stood again, scanning the tree line. The storm clouds were gathering fast now, dark and heavy, the kind that could trap a traveler for days. "We best get moving," he muttered. "Ain't safe to linger." He lifted her up onto his horse, a big scarred bay gelding named Cutter, then swung up behind her, wrapping one arm around to steady her. She stiffened at first, but when the first flakes of snow began to fall, she leaned back slightly, drawn by the quiet steadiness of the man behind her. The trail wound up through the canyon, the wind rising to a low howl. Elias guided the horse through drifts of pine needles and frozen mud, his mind turning over what had just happened. He'd spent most of his life alone, a trapper, a hunter, a man who found comfort only in the silence of the high country. But now, the little figure sitting in front of him shivered, and without thinking, he pulled his coat around her shoulders. She glanced back at him once, eyes big and uncertain. "Why'd you help me?" she asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. The question wasn't one he had words ready for. After a long silence, he finally said, "'Cause somebody should've." Morning came slow to the mountains, with a pale light spilling over the peaks and turning the snow into fields of fire. The storm had passed in the night, leaving behind silence so deep that even the trees seemed to hold their breath. Smoke curled from the chimney of the small log cabin tucked against the slope, and inside, warmth glowed from the crackling fire. Elias Kane stirred from his chair, rubbing his stiff neck. He hadn't slept much. Every few hours he'd woken and glanced toward the small figure sleeping beside the hearth. Clara curled beneath a wool blanket, her blonde hair tangled across her cheek. She hadn't stirred once, too exhausted from fear, hunger, and cold. He stood, stretching, the wooden floor creaking under his boots. Cutter neighed outside, demanding his morning feed, but Elias stayed quiet for a moment longer, just watching the girl. Something about her smallness tugged at a place inside him he hadn't known still existed. When he finally moved, he did so carefully. He poured water from the tin kettle, set it to heat over the fire, then pulled a few slices of dried venison from a sack. The smell of frying meat filled the cabin, rich and comforting. A few minutes later, he heard a soft rustle. Clara sat up slowly, blinking in confusion before her eyes widened. She wasn't dreaming. "Morning," Elias said, not turning from the pan. "You sleep all right?" She hesitated, clutching the blanket around her shoulders. "Yes, sir." Elias frowned a little, still keeping his voice gentle. "Ain't gotta call me sir. Elias'll do." She nodded shyly, her fingers twisting in the blanket. "Thank you." "Elias." He handed her a tin plate with a few slices of venison and a biscuit. She looked at it like it was treasure. He watched her take the first bite, small, hesitant, like she was afraid it might be taken away. "Slow down," he said softly when she began eating too fast. "Plenty more where that came from." She froze, embarrassed, then smiled a little. "Sorry, I ain't eaten since—" She stopped herself, eyes falling. Elias didn't press. Instead, he poured her a cup of warm water, then crouched beside the fire, stoking it higher. The flames danced across the walls, lighting the scars in the logs, each one a story of survival. When she was done eating, he gave her one of his old shirts to wear while her dress dried by the fire. It hung on her like a tent, sleeves rolled 3 times over, but she giggled when she caught sight of herself in the small mirror on the shelf. The sound startled Elias, light and warm, so out of place in the lonely mountain air that it made his chest ache. "You'll need new clothes come spring," he muttered. "Nearest town's 3 days downriver. We'll manage till then." Clara's eyes went wide. "We?" Elias met her gaze and realized how carefully she'd asked the question, how much weight that single word carried. He cleared his throat, looking away. "Well, can't leave you out here alone, can I? Figure you stay till we find someone kin to take you in." She looked down again, nodding, but her expression dimmed. For a long while she said nothing, staring into the flames as though they might show her the family she'd lost. Elias felt it, that quiet sadness hanging in the air like mist, and something in him stirred again, heavier this time. After breakfast, he took her outside. The world was new and shining after the storm. The pines glittered with ice, and the creek that ran near the cabin smoked faintly in the cold. Clara gasped softly, spinning once, her small boots sinking into the snow. "It's beautiful," Elias chuckled under his breath. "You ain't seen it come spring yet. Flowers grow all through the meadow yonder. Wild ones, red and yellow." She turned toward him, smiling. "Do you live here all alone?" "Always have," he said simply. "Ain't much for company except the horse and the wind." She tilted her head. "Ain't you lonely?" The question landed deeper than she knew. Elias adjusted his hat, pretending to check the saddle. "Got used to it, I reckon." But as he watched her run a few steps toward the creek, bending to scoop up snow in her mittens, he realized how strange that answer sounded now. The quiet that used to comfort him felt different, thinner somehow, as if she'd filled the space with something he hadn't had in years. The day passed slow and steady. He showed her how to fetch water from the creek without slipping on the rocks. She helped him stack firewood, or at least tried, since most of the logs were nearly as big as she was. When he split kindling, she clapped at the crack of each piece, laughing every time he startled the crows from the trees. By afternoon, the clouds rolled back in, and a light snow began to fall again. Clara grew quieter, sitting on the porch steps, wrapped in his old coat. Elias joined her, setting down a cup of warm broth in her hands. She took a sip, then asked softly, "Elias, you had a little girl once?" He froze, the question slicing through him. For a long time, the only sound was the whisper of snow landing on the roof. Then finally he said, "A long time ago, before the fever took her. Took her mama, too." Clara turned her head slowly toward him. "What was her name?" "Annie," he said, his voice roughened by memory. She was about your age when she passed. Clara didn't speak. She just reached out and set her small hand on his rough one. It was a simple gesture, quiet and innocent, but it nearly undid him. He swallowed hard, feeling his throat tighten. "You're a brave one, Clara," he said after a moment. "Got more fight in you than most grown folks I've met." She smiled faintly, her eyes soft. "You're brave too, Papa." He blinked. For a heartbeat, he thought he'd misheard. But when he turned to her, she was watching him with a shy, uncertain look, as if she didn't know whether she'd said something wrong.